Like a lot of other folks out there, I enjoyed the Man on the Run documentary. But in order for us to get a deeper appreciation of Paul's solo career, I decided to make this video for McCartney Act 3.0, as I call it, from 1981 to 1986. I'm not sure if Paul's ever really going to discuss those years in depth at any point in the future. I hope I'm wrong, but I think this is where channels like mine actually fill the gap with a lot of things. Hopefully for some of the folks who are more seasoned fans and maybe somebody new to this channel or new to the McCartney fandom in general. So let's go ahead and get started with that. And with the starting point, we really have to kind of start with the end of Man on the Run, and this is where this introduction is coming into play. So, December 1979, Wings played what would become their final concert in Glasgow. Nobody really knew it at the time. At the time it felt like another high point, but in reality it quietly marked the end of an era, again, although no one would really know it at the time. Just weeks later, January 1980, Wings is doing a tour of Japan. They're about to embark on a tour of Japan. They arrive in Tokyo, and that's where plans unraveled. Upon arrival for the tour, McCartney, Paul McCartney of course, is arrested for marijuana possession. He spends some time in detention and gets released, but as a result, the tour for January and February of 1980 is canceled. So that definitely throws a wrench into a lot of things. After his release, McCartney 2 gets released May 1980. This is Paul's first entirely solo album in 10 years. So I think even at this point, it's possible, maybe somehow possible, that Wings might have continued in some form. They're discussing it, they're thinking about it. You've got a couple new members with Wings. Of course, you have Paul, Linda, and Nenny. But, as the world knows, sadly on December 8th, 1980, tragedy struck. John Lennon is murdered in New York City. The news goes around the world and shocks the entire world. For Paul, it's a deeply personal loss that hits him very hard. At this point in his life, he's processing grief while facing new fears about basically his fame and safety. And it's at this point that Act 3.0 begins. Commercially, 1981 started off quiet, but behind the scenes, Paul was busy recording new material. Paul actually does return to public life in 1982 with the album Tug of War. This album, produced by George Martin, blended basically emotional depth with Paul's songwriting on this particular album. And indeed, Paul continues to collaborate with George Martin, producing the next two follow-up albums as well. Now, at the core of the album is Here Today, which is a really heartfelt tribute to John Lennon. It really does show Paul as a, being in a very vulnerable, reflective, and deeply human mode. Obviously with the loss of his friend and fellow collaborator for many years. The single Ebony and Ivory, which is his duet with Stevie Wonder, became a massive hit which topped the charts worldwide. Take It Away, that's another top 10 hit in the US. I remember the video on MTV well. It has a very memorable video with Paul, Ringo, and Linda, as well as George Martin. There's also actor John Hurt playing Brian Epstein, a Brian Epstein type role in the video. If you've seen the video, you know. So Tug of War itself became the final single of the album. That's the title track, but it really wouldn't achieve the chart success of the previous two singles. Still, Paul was back in form commercially, and he definitely received some of the best critical praise in quite a while with this album. Again, just definitely a strong commercial start to the decade, and this is an album that belongs in any serious Paul McCartney collection. 1983 sees the release of Pipes of Peace. Pipes of Peace finds Paul kind of leaning a little bit more further into a pop direction. Now, these were leftover tracks from Tug of War, the previous album. I believe at one point there was talk of it as some sort of double album, although that never happened. So really, at this point, Paul is very busy recording multiple tracks for the two albums, and of course, writing a screenplay, which we will get to in the next part. So again, reality, these are leftover tracks from Tug of War. Feels a little bit like it. It's a pleasant album. The album is issued in October of 1983 and featured collaborations with Michael Jackson, which includes the hit Say Say Say, which topped the U.S. charts. Also a very memorable video on MTV that got quite a lot of airplay. Very enjoyable video in my view as well. The next single from the album, So Bad, was issued in the United States, but only hit 23 on the charts, with Pipes of Peace, the title track, as its B-side. Now, other highlights for me include Tug of Peace, Through Our Love, and the track Hey Hey. Now, I know that track gets a lot of flack from some people out in the McCartney community, but for myself, it's actually quite an enjoyable track with Stanley Clarke on drums. So again, with this album, it peaks at number 15 on the charts. It does go platinum. Overall, just a very pleasant album. In my view, though, this is the weakest of the George Martin-produced trilogy of albums between 1982 and 1984. But certainly now, at this point, Paul is really starting to compete with the younger generation of MTV artists. And, of course, that's quite a lot of competition during this time period. 1984. 1984 sees the release of Give My Regards to Broad Street. Kind of a favorite of the channel if you haven't guessed by now. But, of course, Paul is taking a bigger risk by writing a screenplay and, of course, doing this film, with 20th Century Fox as the backing company. So this is also something that Paul's working on during the entire time period between 1982, 1983, and into 1984. Again, he's quite busy. Now, I do have to address, though, of course, that commercially, during the opening weekend in the U.S., the film only took in $1.5 million versus a $9 million overall budget. So, yes, commercially, the film is not a success. You know, we can all acknowledge that. That is an objective fact. So that's, that's kind of what happened with the film. And did sort of show some of the first signs of commercial trouble for McCartney as well. So the same soundtrack album, that came out just over a year since Pipes of Peace, so the album gets released in October of 1984. This particular album goes to number 21 in the U.S. This time it goes gold. It doesn't go platinum, but it does go gold with the Billboard charts. And even at this point, there's a silver lining. No More Lonely Nights becomes a memorable top 10 hit in the U.S. It hits number 6. Certainly, it's my favorite McCartney song of all time. You get a very amazing guitar solo from David Gilmour of Pink Floyd fame, and really shows McCartney, I believe, at the height of his powers. It just proves that his songwriting is remaining as strong as it ever was. Also among the soundtrack highlights, of course, there's two other new rockers, No Values and Not Such a Bad Boy. Those had started life during the latter half of Wings during 1978-1979 time period. Again, very good rockers, very good new songs, and ones I listen to quite often from the Broad Street soundtrack itself. We also get a play-out version of No More Lonely Nights at the end of the soundtrack, so kind of a more disco version, you could say. And of course, various other remixes and everything like that. Yes, including the hiking version. Tom Hunyadi, that's a shout out to you. That's an inside joke between us. But anyways, besides that, we get plenty of Beatles and Wings covers on the soundtrack itself. Again, I only place this second to Tug of War as far as the George Martin trilogy. In particular, I definitely enjoy the remake of Silly Love Songs. I think audio-wise, even if you don't like the video, the audio track, it's quite an interesting little take on Silly Love Songs. It's an updated 1984 version of the 1976 number one hit from Wings at the Speed of Sound. It's a film I quite enjoy and definitely a hallmark of the early MTV era. I highly recommend seeking it out to folks. You might find that you enjoy it more than you think you might. At the very least, if you're not a fan of the plot, it's definitely a lot of good sequences, including the warehouse sequence where Paul and Ringo are jamming. And again, of course, you've got Paul, Ringo, and Linda during this time as well as Eric Stewart of 10cc fame, kind of working all together during this entire time period. So seek out the film. I think you might enjoy it, but that pretty much wraps up at least 1984 for Paul. Going further into Act 3.0. Certainly by 1985, the music industry is changing dramatically. Of course, we've got the arrival, well, really the maturity now of MTV, Image, and a new generation of stars, such as Duran Duran, Michael Jackson, and Madonna, among others, are dominating the scene. So what this finds is that Paul's adapting to this changing landscape. One of the first things he's doing in 1985, one of the first major things that we're covering, of course, is he's performing at Live Aid, delivering Let It Be to a global audience of 1 billion people. No pressure there at all. Despite technical issues during the set, this is after the famous Queen set where they owned that event. They owned it, hands down. No argument for me or any other person who could objectively or even subjectively watch the performance. But anyway, so there's some technical issues during Let It Be, but the moment became unforgettable thanks to some help from Pete Townsend, Bob Geldof, Alison Moyet, and David Bowie. They're lending their talents to the chorus, so they're coming out singing, which is actually a nice unintended magical moment. The crowd also is joining in on this rare live performance, and let's not forget, by this point in Paul's career, it had been literally almost 6 years since Paul last stepped foot on a live stage, so it was a very rare performance at this point. In the 21st century, we're used to Paul seemingly touring every year, every 2 years at this point, but back then, much rarer, at least between 1979 to 1989 during this decade, and certainly during this time period. So, November 18th, 1985, this finds Paul releasing the title track to the Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd film, Spies Like Us. A wonderful, entertaining little film, in my view. It's at this point that he's returning to Capitol Records after being signed with Columbia Records since Back to the Egg in 1979. Now, the single itself reaches number 7 in the U.S. charts. It's definitely a nice piece of pop and rock music from 1985. I know some people dismiss it or they think it's too silly, but it's not any sillier, really, than anything else from this time period in 1985. And it proves, at least even commercially, even up to this point, Paul is still able to somewhat compete with much younger artists. You know, don't forget that some of those same artists are at the top of their careers during this point, and certainly, having top 10 and number 1 hits with ease. At this point, Paul is still at least competing, in that very same space. The next album, however, would yield probably some different results, at least commercially. And finally, we get to 1986. This is the final year in this video, McCartney Act 3.0. 1986 finds Paul releasing Press to Play, and this is experimenting really with a lot more modern production and 80s sounds, working with Hugh Padgham. Hugh Padgham, of course, being famous for producing albums with Genesis, with The Police, with David Bowie, Peter Gabriel, among other artists. Now, the response to the album itself is a little bit mixed. It's showing Paul's willingness to experiment with sounds and evolve. It's definitely the most 80s-sounding album Paul ever put out, with all the different textures and sounds and everything like that. Sadly, commercially, this is the first U.S. album not to go gold, which is to sell 500,000 copies upon the initial release. So this definitely finds some fallout. I don't know whether this was just a little bit of a delayed fallout from the failure of the Broad Street film itself, something else, changing tastes. I don't know, really, because the thing is, Press is the strong first single. Sadly, it didn't hit top 10 in the U.S. It only got to number 21 in the U.S. It does have basically a good premiere on MTV. Seems to be a very catchy song. But this is actually the highest charting song from Press to Play, which is a good album. Has a lot of good songs and textures on it, and things that I quite enjoy. The video itself finds Paul going into the famous tube subway in London, so very much going against the grain of a lot more high-budget videos of the time period, thinking of Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel as being one of the prime examples. Now, there were 3 follow-up singles with this album. Stranglehold, Pretty Little Head, and Only Love Remains were released, but they really failed to chart. I want to say Stranglehold only made it to number 81 in the top 200. One of my personal favorite songs is Right Away, which is only available on the CD version of this album. And I would say give it a listen. I mean, the 80s sound, you may enjoy it, you may not enjoy it, but there's definitely still some good craftsmanship going on underneath. And this sort of brings us to at least the conclusion of this part of Paul's career. Now, during this time again, Paul's facing some of the most, definitely one of the most challenging periods of his career. We've got the end of Wings and the loss of John Lennon. But through it all, he continues to move forward. He's adapting, he's experimenting, and he's yet again rebuilding his place in a never-changing musical world. This really isn't just a survival, it's a transformation for Paul. Now, if you enjoyed this look at Paul McCartney Act 3.0, please make sure, just don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more, because after all, even legends have to reinvent themselves.